So whenever you apply for a new credit card, there's a couple of things that you're thinking about and hoping for. First and foremost, you just want to be approved. But right after you see that approved image pop up, the next piece of info you scan for is actually what credit limit you were approved for. And this can either be exciting or frustrating depending on the limit that you're given. Now really quickly, let's talk about what a credit limit actually is. A credit limit is essentially a hard spending limit placed on your credit card by the issuing bank. If your credit limit is $10,000, you can spend up to a max of $10,000. And then at that point, if you want to put more spend on the card, you're going to need to make a payment to lower your balance and free up some spending power. And so that is why having a low limit on a credit card can be pretty frustrating. If you have a credit card with a limit of $500, you're going to be constantly making payments to try to free up spending power so that you can actually use the card. So knowing this, we can see a clear reason why we would want higher credit limits on our cards. But there's also another reason why we would want higher credit limits in general. So one of the major components that goes into calculating our credit score is going to be credit utilization. Whenever your credit card billing period closes and your statement is posted, your balance at the time of closing is reported to the credit bureau. If that balance is high in relation to your overall credit limit, then your score will most likely drop. If you report a balance of $500 and your overall credit limit is only $1,000, then you're going to reporting a 50% utilization rate, which will tank your score. On the other hand, if you report the same $500 balance, but your overall limit is $10,000, well, that is just showing a 5% utilization rate, which actually can have a really positive impact on your credit score. So now we know a couple of reasons why it would be beneficial to have high credit limits. Let's now go into some strategies to raise the limits on the cards that we already have. Towards the end of the video, I'll explain how we can go ahead and get higher credit limits from the get-go and not have to worry about trying to get those limits raised after the fact. Okay, so step one, we need to be proactive. Oftentimes, some will say you can just wait around and eventually your bank will raise your credit limit automatically. And while that advice is true to a certain extent, it can be hit or miss at times. And myself personally, I don't like to be passive with things like that. I like to take things into my own hands. I don't like to sit around and wait for problems to solve themselves. If I want something fixed or if I want something in general, I'm just gonna ask for it. You can just straight up call your bank or send a chat message and 100% just ask for a credit limit increase on your card. I don't suggest asking for just the highest amount possible, but instead ask for the amount that you actually need. If your card has a $4,000 limit, don't ask for an increase to, let's say, $50,000. That's gonna definitely raise some red flags to your bank. Instead, try to double or at most triple that credit limit, so taking that 4K up to maybe 8K is very reasonable, and maybe at the high end up to 12K. Doubling your limit should be the goal, and tripling is really the highest you can ever really hope for. Now, if you're not like myself and you don't really care about being a little bit more passive about things, just waiting around and eventually hoping for a credit limit increase is fine. What you can do is just make sure that you're spending close to your limit on your card every single month, and then of course just making sure to always pay off the full balance every single month. After some time of doing this, your bank may think, hey, if we give this person a little bit more credit limit, maybe they're going to be willing to spend a little bit more on their card, and then we can earn a little bit more from their transaction revenue. Now, typically when these passive credit limits happen, it's not going to really be as big of a limit increase as you might think. From my experience with Chase, at least, every time I've gotten a credit limit without asking, it's only been about $1,000 or $2,000. It's never really been like a full double, or definitely not anywhere near tripling my entire credit limit. So if you're going to go the passive route and not ask, don't expect a huge credit limit increase. But I suggest over time trying to increase the limits on every single card that you think has a low credit limit. If you're already happy with the credit limit, then don't worry about it. But if you have a card with like a $500 or a $1,000 credit limit or something really low like that, you should be trying to do whatever you can to get that limit increased. But now let's talk about what can be done from the get-go to make sure that when you're applying for new credit cards, you're gonna go ahead and get the highest credit limit possible. It's actually really a pretty simple concept overall. If you have a high income and a low debt to income ratio, you're gonna get approved for higher credit limits. Just because you have a FICO score of 800 plus, that actually doesn't guarantee you're gonna get a high credit limit, and it actually doesn't even guarantee you're gonna get approved for the credit card application. Oftentimes, people vastly underestimate how much debt to income ratios matter. So for example, let's say your income is $120,000 a year. Broken down monthly, that is $10,000 a month. Pretty good income, right? But let's say that you have a mortgage of $3,000 a month. You also have a car loan of $800 a month, and you also have student loans of $700 a month. So out of that $10,000 of of income before taxes, by the way, you're left with $4,500 in payments, which actually puts your debt to income ratio at 45%, which is pretty high and actually really risky to banks. The bank doesn't really care if you've got, let's say, $200,000 in stocks, $30,000 in cash, but then a really high debt to income ratio. They're way more focused on that high debt to income ratio. They don't really care or even know what other assets you might have. On paper to them, you look pretty risky. Most of your income is tied up into debt payments. And if you are approved for the card, you're gonna have a lower credit limit than you might think. Using myself as an example, right now our household income is about $150,000. I'll go ahead and round that down to $12,000 a month. In my household, we have absolutely no debt besides our mortgage, and the mortgage payment is $850 a month. So that puts my debt to income ratio at about 7%. Even if my net worth is, let's say, way lower than the person from the previous example, I still have a higher chance to not only get approved for the card, but actually get approved for a really high credit limit because my debt to income ratio is so low. And of course, you're also gonna still need that pretty strong credit score. If I've got a FICO of 550, but a really nice low debt to income ratio, it still doesn't matter. I'll still probably be declined for the credit card application. It's really going to be the combination of a strong credit score and a low debt to income ratio. So if you have a high debt to income ratio, what can you do to quickly lower that? Well, there's really only two things that you can do, or a combination of the two. You can either pay off your debt, or you can also increase your income. And doing both would have the biggest effect. Lowering that debt to income ratio and raising your overall credit score is how you're going to be able to make sure that you're always approved for nice high credit limits with your credit cards. Now, if you have a pretty low FICO score right now, and you want to learn about some methods and ways that you could wrap